McGraw-Hill Professional presents The Power of Mandate: How Visionary Leaders Keep Their Organization Focused on What Matters Most. Written by Scott Stawski with Jimmy Brown, Ph.D. Narrated by Scott R. Pollak. Chapter 1. Introducing the Mandate-Driven Leader. Good business leaders create a vision, articulate the vision, passionately own the vision, and relentlessly drive it to completion. Jack Welch, former chairman and CEO, General Electric. Teaching leadership skills and principles in itself is a large business, and most consultants and business schools teach consensus building and management as the core foundation of leadership. In fact, in many companies, the concept of achieving consensus has achieved a sacrosanct status. But truth be told, consensus-driven leadership is, in fact, a root cause of many a failed business. Consensus can be defined a number of different ways. The broadest definition is general agreement. The synonyms we find in Roget's Thesaurus are terms along the lines of concur, assent, or popular opinion. When we start digging through MBA texts, we find terms like a decision reached by a group, not through the mandate of an individual, but through agreement of all the participants. In other words, it means the decision was reached by the overall opinion of the group. It does not necessarily mean the decision was reached easily or that there were not widely differing views or active group discussion. It simply means that it was a group decision and or action. Given that there had to be debate and discussion, it is clear that reaching consensus requires negotiation and compromise. The question that must be addressed, especially in today's disruptive business environment, is whether this is always the best approach. Many scholars and business leaders have praised the virtues of consensus management. In a 1990 Harvard Business Review article, Consensus, Continuity, and Common Sense, Rod Canyon, co-founder and CEO of Compaq Computer, stated, "Our management process is based on the concept of consensus management. The real benefit of the process is not that you get the answer, but all the things you go through to get the answer. You get a lot of facts. You get a lot of people thinking, and the result is that everybody owns the decision when you get through. The assumption here is that groups always make the right decision." Really? I know some very charismatic individuals who are great at consensus building, right to the point where the consensus-driven programs they implemented failed miserably. As for Compaq Computer and its much-hailed consensus management approach of the late 1980s, after many turbulent years, Compaq was acquired by Hewlett-Packard in 2002, and the Compaq brand was discontinued in 2014. The case we will make in this book is that while consensus-based decision-making is very popular and does tend to make people feel good, it is not necessarily the best approach. And it is rarely the right approach for C-level executives, especially during a time when technology is driving real business disruption. Being popular is not the same thing as being effective. Peter Drucker, the legendary management consultant, educator, and author, once remarked, "Leadership is not magnetic personality. That can just as well be a glib tongue. It is not making friends and influencing people. That is flattery. Leadership is lifting a person's vision to higher heights, the raising of a person's performance to a higher standard, the building of a personality beyond its normal limitations." Drucker's comment helps crystallize the fact that visionary leaders establish objectives higher than the status quo, or completely outside the box of the status quo. Frankly, these visionary and disruptive leaders eschew the status quo, and they realize that consensus management techniques epitomize status quo thinking. In today's business world, too many senior leaders practice consensus management in a business environment that demands a different approach. Today, companies using harmony of decision-making can be on a fast track to failure for the simple reason that consensus is not necessarily about what is best for the company. Nor is it about establishing and moving toward a vision that lifts everyone's performance. It is about finding the outcome that is least objectionable to everyone involved. Quite often in that approach, innovation gives way to harmony and good behavior. And, similar to the saying about well-behaved people rarely making history, comfortable organizations rarely change the world. When we consider the facts at hand, it becomes painfully apparent that too many businesses and their leaders have moved too far down the path of consensus-driven management. They strive for congruity to the detriment of company success. While this point may always have been true throughout business history, it is being amplified by the inflection point and resulting business disruption we are at today. Today, much of our economy, the digital economy, is now driven by technology. This technological innovation is resulting in real, long-lasting business disruption. New markets and channels are being created, entire business paradigms rethought, supply and demand channels upended. Nothing is sacrosanct. Think about it. The winners in today's digital economy are the disruptors, the absolute antithesis of consensus. So how do we have all these amazing technological innovations that power our world and allow us to do things that only a few years ago were the stuff of science fiction? Simply put, these disruptive companies are propelled forward by mandate-driven leadership. And as we'll learn through the course of this book, these leaders are not consensus-driven, and they really don't care who agrees with them when it concerns achieving their vision. So why study these troublemakers, who sometimes are equally hated as loved? Because in today's disruptive business environment, we have too many executives who seek and are rewarded more by successful consensus management than by mandating a vision to reality. However, it is the mandate-driven leaders who are the true effective leaders, and their companies are not just disruptors. They are making lasting change to the world around us. Leaders that epitomize mandate-driven leadership have created or redefined entire industries. Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Steve Jobs of Apple, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Reed Hastings of Netflix, Brian Chesky of Airbnb, Mike Lawrie of DXC Technology, and, of course, Bill Gates of Microsoft. In this book, we will discuss the theory of mandate-driven leadership and review practical learnings from these disruptors. What is leadership? Leadership is a very popular topic. There are articles, classes, and even entire degree programs devoted to it. Walk into any bookstore and you'll find many stocked shelves to browse. Type the word leadership into Amazon's search function and you'll get more than 60,000 books. Google will pull up even more articles and studies. Obviously, there is no shortage of opinions and perspectives on the subject. That, of course, is part of the problem. Even if we set aside the discussion of whether a leader should be mandate or consensus-driven, there are so many different views on what it takes to be a good leader that it can be hard to muddle through them all. We could look for theoretical guidance from people like Warren Bennis in his On Becoming a Leader, 1989. Bennis interviews some exceptional leaders, including director Sidney Pollak, author Betty Friedan, and A&M Records founder Herb Alpert. The premise of his book is that leadership is a learned trait and it takes work to make it a personal habit. Then there are the practical recommendations of people like Mike Thompson in The Anywhere Leader, 2011, and Jeffrey Fox in How to Become a CEO, 1998. Both of these works provide exceptional guidance. Thompson relates how great leaders tend to have three characteristics. They are driven by progress, sensationally curious, and vastly resourceful. Fox provides even more practical advice for upcoming leaders. Avoid writing a nasty memo. Overpay your employees. and skip all office parties. Each of these works has valuable insight, in particular for those beginning their management career. However, from a leadership perspective, these are not the works that address what traits and models are needed for a leader to be effective in today's disruptive environment. For example, what type of leader is needed at the traditional broadcast networks if they are to compete, even survive, against Netflix? There are even the borderline sociopathic approaches recommended by Robert Greene in The 48 Laws of Power, 1998. In this book, Greene puts forth 48 essential laws that will propel leaders to success in their objective. More aptly, Greene would say to domination of their environment. He draws support for these laws from philosophers, Machiavelli and Sun Tzu, among others, and historical figures as diverse as Henry Kissinger, Julius Caesar, and P.T. Barnum. The Los Angeles Times referred to Greene as a cult hero with the hip-hop set, Hollywood elite, and prison inmates alike. Even though some of Greene's advice might be handy for some mandate-driven leaders, for karma's sake, we're going to leave this one alone. In 2016, Patrick Lencioni wrote the best-selling leadership book, The Ideal Team Player: How to Recognize and Cultivate the Three Essential Virtues. The book traces a fictional leader who is trying to turn around a company by reestablishing its culture of teamwork. Notice that we said it is fiction, not a biography. Despite all these different efforts to address the topic, no one seems to be able to answer the question, what does it really take to be an effective leader in today's disruptive business environment? As important, what is the definition of an effective leader? With skyrocketing executive compensation, some would say that statement has become a multi-million-dollar question. When we consider the impact a leader can have on the outcomes of an organization, it is actually more like a multi-billion-dollar question. Nowhere is this more apparent than when we consider leaders who are driving innovations that are changing our world and propelling the digital economy. Given the littered landscape of failed companies built on great ideas, it is obvious that having the right leader at the helm is critical. What differentiates a good leader from a bad one? What makes someone able to drive a group to a desired set of outcomes? How do leaders keep their organizations focused on what truly matters most? There are a lot of different ways to ask it, but at the end of the day, it is all about driving not just desirable, but visionary outcomes for the organization and the people in it. It seems like every author who has ever typed a single word about leadership is determined to put his or her own spin on what it takes to be an effective leader. A fairly detailed qualitative meta-analysis of the leading literature suggests that leadership traits and characteristics can be grouped into three common themes of what it takes to be an effective leader. However, in today's disruptive environment, it is not enough for an effective leader to solely draw from these three themes. For today's leader to be effective, these themes must be superimposed on an environment where the leader has defined a vision for the company and, through directive management, mandates that vision to execution each and every day. The leadership traits summarized in these three themes are critical, but they cannot exist in a vacuum without this visionary mandate. The first theme is that leaders expect the best from themselves and from others. This may sound like something from a basic Boy Scout credo, but a leader's performance can really only be evaluated in terms of the performance of the group. Thus, if leaders want to succeed, they need everyone doing things right. Some advocates of servant leadership approaches suggest that true leaders focus on the success of the team, not on making themselves look good. William Cohen wrote in The Stuff of Heroes, The 8 Universal Laws of Leadership, "My research debunks the myth that many people seem to have, that you become a leader by fighting your way to the top. Rather, you become a leader by helping others to the top. Helping your employees is as important as and many times more so than trying to get the most work out of them. While this isn't necessarily always the case, at the end of the day, all good leaders know the only path for them to success is for the team to succeed. Team success is sometimes mistaken to be solely the realm of consensus management. Not true. Mandate-driven leaders also drive teams to success. In fact, they absolutely require it. Regardless of what a leader's motive is, leaders stay motivated and motivate others. This is our second common theme, and it is quite an important leadership characteristic. Why is it so important? Let's answer that question with another question. Have you ever seen someone who was unmotivated effectively lead a successful team or organization? Probably not. Have you ever seen an exceptional leader who was not pushing the team to achieve even higher goals? Didn't think so. Good leaders know how to get a team to do more than they think they can do. We'll debate about whether it is better for a leader to motivate through inspiration or anxiety in a later discussion, but at the end of the day, great leaders push individuals and teams to a higher goal than they could ever imagine for themselves. In addition to motivating their teams, leaders are also not shy about letting the world know about their accomplishments. The great ones are even less shy about letting the world know about their team's accomplishments, which is our third theme. When broadcasting their successes, they talk about we much more than I. Servant leaders do this out of a commitment to their team's well-being. Narcissistic leaders do it because they recognize that people like being recognized for their hard work and really dislike it when others take credit for their work. Mandate-driven leaders understand that recognition drives outcomes and helps teams drive toward the vision set by the leader. Effective leaders understand this and leverage this knowledge in how they interact with their teams. As discussed earlier, the literature to date includes outstanding works delving further into these three themes and all the learned leadership characteristics, traits, and some would say rules that compose the themes. Missing is the realization that no company today can afford to be led within a status quo environment. Organizations cannot be led by those who excel at consensus management and propel themselves to the forefront through a path of least resistance. Organizations led by the qualified yet ordinary are setting themselves up for failure. Today, we need leaders who can push organizations in directions they may not want to go, in part because they don't realize they need to. These leaders have a vision, and they command the organization to take a certain course of action to achieve that vision. These visionary leaders have a belief, idea, strategy, or tactic that is so compelling that they do not accept no for an answer. Through mandate, they drive the vision from concept to implementation. Through this leadership willpower, organizations are propelled toward the vision. Once on that path, management and the employee base of these companies can increase the depth, breadth, and velocity of that forward motion. A leader that possesses the traits within these three themes, who has also established an environment where the vision of the future is clear and is being mandated to execution, is the effective leader needed for today. What is effective leadership? Effective leadership is about maximizing the performance of teams, groups, and organizations, and this definition is fairly consistent with most experts. Effective leadership promotes effective team and group performance and drives the desired outcomes. The key is the desired outcomes. Mandate-driven leaders rarely use consensus to uncover the desired outcomes. They have a vision, and they dictate the desired business outcomes required by the organization to achieve that vision. Ideally, the resulting vision will enhance the well-being of the people being led, even if they don't realize it at the time. And if those outcomes aren't beneficial, well, that particular leader won't be in that spot very long. Being an effective leader and being an effective manager are not necessarily the same thing. This debate often devolves into an analysis of the differences between leadership and management. This debate is very tricky as the two terms are often used interchangeably, and the difference can be a matter of degrees and perspective. Even when people do recognize that there is a difference, the delineation can be quite nuanced. Ask 10 different people the difference between leadership and management, and you might get 11 different responses. While the details may vary, the commonalities usually break down into something about leaders being strategic, charismatic, and admired, and managers being organizational taskmasters with a whip in one hand and a bullhorn in the other. While mandate-driven leaders prefer to be inspiring and revered, it doesn't bother them one bit to be seen as autocratic and prescriptive. And, most important, they know when to bewitch. It is important to note here that we use the word effective rather than good or liked as the definition of what a leader needs to be. It is great if you can do both at the same time, but it is not always the case. Sometimes the most effective leaders are not necessarily what we would consider likable people. Steve Jobs, founder and former CEO of Apple, once said, "I don't want people to dislike me. I'm indifferent to whether they dislike me." That being said, he was disliked by many within Apple, in part because his leadership style was anything but consensus-driven. He also revolutionized several industries and created to this day one of the most valuable companies in the world. Jobs himself admits that he was a better leader and a better change agent than he was a manager. And for every Apple employee, stockholder, or iPhone user, that is just fine. Many people, myself included, consider Steve Jobs to be one of the great technological visionaries and mandate-driven leaders of the modern age. What is often forgotten, however, is that he had a well-deserved reputation of being a difficult and demanding individual. Read the stories of people who worked for him, particularly early in his career, and you'll see a picture of someone who was impatient and arrogant, and who really didn't play well with others unless they wanted to play his game. Steve Jobs' official biographer, Walter Isaacson, in Steve Jobs, The Exclusive Biography, relates how Jobs was both inspiring and intimidating at the same time. In 1981, Xerox was introducing the Xerox Star computer. Steve and his team of managers were given a preview. They were less than impressed. Steve Jobs later called Bob Belleville, the chief Xerox Star designer, and said, "Everything you've ever done in your life is shit, so why don't you come work for me?" He did. Throughout Jobs' career, people were intimidated by him, but they wanted to work for him. However, in 1985, his leadership style did catch up with him, and he left Apple, the very company he founded. Jobs learned a thing or two, however, by the time Apple's board of directors brought him back in 1997. He had learned how to lead with more than just a technical vision, but a vision to change consumer habits. He sought to embrace others in the pursuit of his vision, to change the way we work, play, and interact. He then took an active role in championing how those products could make the world a better place. The result, of course, is the whole Apple ecosystem that includes iPhones, iPads, and everything that pervades everything we do. By the time Steve Jobs stepped down from his role at Apple in 2011, 2 months before his death, Apple was valued at $347 billion, making it the second most valuable company in the world. Whenever I talk about the concept of mandate-driven leadership or directive stewardship, I often get asked for examples. The late Steve Jobs is one of the more visible examples of someone who exhibited this model. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, is another who is also profiled in this book. Like Jobs, Bezos has a reputation for being obstinate, at times mean-spirited, and to this day he is said to be a very difficult and challenging person. All that being said, in January 2019, Amazon became the world's most valuable company in terms of market capitalization. Mandate-driven leaders' clear priority is to be effective over being liked. However, this is not an either-or discussion. A critical understanding that will be discussed throughout the book is that individuals bring their own persona into their mandate-driven leadership model. When you look at all the various personas of disruptive mandate-driven leaders, it becomes obvious that leaders don't necessarily have to choose between being effective and being liked. Yes, some leaders like Jobs and Bezos have reputations for being disliked. However, many other mandate-driven leaders are much admired by their employees. Brian Chesky, the CEO and co-founder of Airbnb, is profiled in this book. In 2016, Airbnb was named the best place to work by Glassdoor, having dethroned Google. Larry Page, the co-founder of Google, would easily be characterized as a mandate-driven leader, but has a well-deserved reputation for not only being visionary, aggressive, and ambitious, but also collaborative and fun. Mandate-driven leaders who are successfully leading innovative organizations that create new value in the market focus first on being impactful, using the persona and traits at hand. Mike Lawrie, chairman and CEO of DXC Technology, is one of the leaders interviewed for this book. For transparency, the author is an executive for the same company. As an author and academic, it was important to maintain objectivity. So, the natural question, why profile your own corporate leader? In researching this project, it was important to profile disruptive, mandate-driven leaders both in startup environments as well as individuals leading established companies that are being impacted by the digital economy. Each month, we are seeing the previous titans of various industries being disrupted right out of business. During the final edits for this book, perhaps the most well-known retailer of all time, Sears and Roebuck, has filed for bankruptcy with probable liquidation, one of many companies that could not survive today's inflection point. Two good examples of companies that have been severely impacted by this disruption are Computer Sciences Corporation and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Services, formerly EDS. Both of these Fortune 50 companies were struggling to merely survive until a mandate-driven leader, Mike Lawrie, took the helm. Since they were merged to create DXC Technology, the company has delivered outstanding results, moving from victim to disruptor. DXC, employing more than 125,000 people, is a case study worthy of discussion. Interestingly, Mike Lawrie stresses that the use of directive leadership must be situational, not absolute. Rightfully, he does not advocate mandate-driven leadership in all situations. In the end, Lawrie believes that it is far more important for leaders to understand what a particular situation requires and to act appropriately instead of relying solely on either mandates or consensus. In other words, leaders need to understand what the circumstances demand and what the people around them need to achieve success. The most important thing for leaders to do is to have a diverse leadership toolbox that includes an understanding of when it is most appropriate to use varying leadership styles to accomplish organizational objectives. In some cases, a consensus-based leadership style is fine, Lawrie states. Others, a much more directive or mandate-based leadership style is appropriate. The leader has to have a very good understanding of the environment within which they are thrust and the challenges of the organization. That dictates the leadership style, not the other way around. As a matter of fact, a leadership style that is misapplied to a given situation can be a disaster. Steve Jobs and the other leaders profiled in this book have changed our world. And make no mistake, in each case that change was a result of a vision. That vision became a mandate, and the mandate drove the organization forward. Not everyone is always comfortable working in these kinds of organizations, and the stories of people who left Apple during Jobs' tenure are many. Of course, for everyone that left, Jobs had 10 resumes of others who were ready to take their place. And this is the difference between a mandate-driven leader and someone who is just a big jerk. Jerks are hard to work with because that is just who they are, and they are going to be that way all the time. Mandate.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?